What if you woke up tomorrow and you weren't just a trader, but a player in the most dangerous market in the world? A market that doesn't recognize borders, but creates them. A market that doesn't care who wins the war, as long as it's selling fuel to both sides. Before you begin this journey, shed your identity. Because in the world of the death trade, names are fake, but bank accounts are real. You're not just a businessman, you're a cog in a much bigger machine. In the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you how to become a global arms dealer, and how you'll end up either holed up in a palace or locked in a solitary confinement cell. Your start won't be in a fancy boardroom, but in a moment of collapse. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, civil war in Yugoslavia. Back in 1995, you're a 28-year-old guy speaking multiple languages, and you notice something strange. The arsenal of a superpower is suddenly unguarded. Millions of Soviet weapons are just sitting there, and former colonies in Africa and Asia want them. At that time, Russian officers hadn't been paid in months. Military depots stretched for thousands of miles from Moscow to Kiev, and the doors were literally open. The key wasn't the weapons, it was the planes. Viktor Bout, a former Soviet Air Force officer who mastered 6 languages, including Arabic and Farsi, started buying old Russian cargo planes, Antonovs and Ilyushins, and shipped everything, from flowers to ammunition. When the Afghan defense minister, Ahmad Shah Massoud, asked if he could move weapons, he didn't hesitate. From that point on, he wasn't just shipping goods anymore, he was shipping wars. First secret: don't start by making bullets. Start by owning a fleet of transport planes. At the Sharjah airport in the UAE, where the law was practically non-existent, you set up shell companies and registered them in Liberia or the Marshall Islands. Here, you're not selling politics, you're selling logistics. Your first client is the warring party, whether it's a rebel group or a government. Governments pay cash, rebels pay with diamonds or future resources. In Angola, you were trading bullets for diamonds. In Liberia, you were dealing directly with Charles Taylor. Now you've reached the top. You're not just a trader anymore, you're part of the military-industrial complex. There's an old theory President Eisenhower put forward in his famous 1961 farewell address, where he warned of a dangerous entity, an unholy alliance between the arms industry, politicians, and the military. Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists." This is your financial theory. You don't need a war to profit, you just need a threat. Arms companies fund the threat through lobbyists in Washington, Moscow, and London. Governments buy weapons to counter that threat, and you, the dealer, fill the gaps that governments can't handle officially. The United States alone controls 42% of the global arms trade, with total world military expenditure exceeding $2.4 trillion in 2023. At this stage, you sit in one room with representatives from warring factions. In the 90s, your weapons were going to the Taliban at the same time they were going to the Northern Alliance. You were selling to Christians in Lebanon and to Saddam Hussein in the same week. The secret truth here is, the CIA knows who you are. In fact, sometimes you work for them. The infamous arms dealer Sarkis Soghanalian, the Armenian-Lebanese guy dubbed the Merchant of Death before you, used to admit, "The Americans knew what I was doing every minute, every hour. If I drank a glass of water, they knew about it, and they knew what kind of water it was." Soghanalian was the one who armed Iraq in the 80s with French howitzers worth $1.4 billion, with the approval of the Reagan administration, to fight the common enemy, Iran. You're useful. You're the unofficial nuclear option. When America wants to arm a group in Nicaragua and doesn't want to admit it, they call someone like you. You sell the weapons, take your commission, and if the plane goes down, the government denies any knowledge. But there's a red line. When you think you've become bigger than the game, The game comes to eat you alive. The first close call was with Basil Zaharov, the Greek-born dealer who sold submarines to Greece, then to Turkey, then to Russia, and ended his life in Monte Carlo. But the modern close call is the story of Viktor Bout. In 2008, after years of being pursued, you think you're untouchable. You have a fleet of planes, clients on 5 continents, a fortune estimated at $6 billion. Then a deal comes that seems like a dream. Clients from an armed group in Colombia want to buy 800 surface-to-air missiles, 30,000 rifles, and 5 tons of C4 explosives to use against Americans. You meet them at a luxury hotel in Bangkok. They tell you, "We have the same enemy. We've been fighting the United States for 15 years. The problem is, these rebels weren't real. They were undercover agents for the US Drug Enforcement Administration. The operation was called Operation Laser Strike. You were arrested in Bangkok and sent to an American prison for 14 years. This is the big pitfall. When you sell to America's official enemy, you can sell weapons to America's enemies as long as America allows it, like Iraq and Iran in the 80s, or like arming the Syrian opposition today through the CIA. But when you sell to enemies they haven't signed off on yet, or you sell to Al-Qaeda or the FARC, then you've just signed your own commercial death warrant. Even if you're working for Russian intelligence, even if you have political cover, when you become an embarrassment to everyone, everyone abandons you. Viktor Bout told the undercover agents, "Our enemy is one." But that didn't save him from the 25-year sentence he was facing. The ending has 2 possible paths. The first path, if you're smart, you end up like Sarkis Soghanalian. You walk away before it's too late. You buy a bank, a hotel, or become a political activist. Soghanalian, after exposing the involvement of American officials in Iraqi arms deals, including Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew, was imprisoned and then released when he helped the Clinton administration dismantle a forgery ring in Lebanon. He moved his offices from the US to France and Jordan and lived until 2011, dying of heart failure in Hialeah, Florida. The second path, 25 years in prison, like what happened to Bout, or death. Or you become an outcast. Even if you get out of prison, they'll come back for you. In 2022, Viktor Bout was exchanged for basketball player Brittany Griner. He returned to Russia as a national hero, welcomed by Russian media, joined the far-right, pro-Kremlin Liberal Democratic Party, and praised President Putin, saying, "I am proud to be Russian, and our president is Putin." But in 2024, newspapers revealed he was again trying to sell weapons to the Houthis in Yemen. The game never lets you go. Because the biggest secret is, you don't own this business owns you. Even when you return to your homeland as a hero, you remain a prisoner of your reputation, a prisoner of your networks, a prisoner of the need for money and power. Viktor Bout left prison only to return to the same game, as if nothing had changed. Maybe you're asking me now, did you ever have regrets? I'll tell you the truth. In this business, conscience is a luxury no one can afford. The bullet doesn't ask the victim's name before it's fired, and I was just the one delivering it. But at night, when you go to sleep in your air-conditioned bed, and you remember the pictures of children in war zones, and you know that the weapons you sold yesterday are what created this devastation, and that the bullet that killed that child might have come from a box that passed through your hands, or traveled on your plane. Only then do you realize that you sold weapons to the world, but you lost your soul. There's an international treaty called the Arms Trade Treaty, adopted by the UN in 2013, signed by 155 countries, but Russia isn't one of them, and many signatories openly violate it. Why? Because the arms trade isn't just business, it's the continuation of politics by other means. You're not a criminal, you're a tool. But does that ease your conscience? Do you still want to become an arms dealer? Think carefully before you answer, because the plane that will take off with you tomorrow to your first destination might be the same one that brings you back in a coffin. Or worse, you might never come back at all.